The sun crept over the ridge like a sleepy guardian, casting golden light across the open valley. Morning dew glistened on the long blades of grass, and a hush hung over the land, broken only by the rustling of wings and the distant calls of birds. In the heart of this serene pasture, nestled between the forest's edge and the cold trickle of a mountain stream, a herd of wild horses stirred. Among them was a filly named Solana. She was small not in size, but in presence. Her coat was a gentle dapple gray, like fog drifting over moonlit stone, and her eyes held the softness of twilight. At nearly 3 years old, she had outgrown the gangly awkwardness of foalhood, but not the hesitance that clung to her like mist. She didn't run with the bold colts who reared and nipped in mock battles near the riverbed. She didn't trot beside the older mares who moved with knowing grace and authority. Solana stayed close to her mother, Marla, and behind the towering figure of Titan, their herd leader. Titan was everything Solana was not. Massive, black as storm clouds, his mane rippled in the wind like war banners. He led the herd with strength and precision, commanding their path through valleys, over plains, and through mountain passes. The others revered him, trusted him to sense threats before they arose, to guide them to food, to keep them safe from predators. Solana watched him from a distance, not with fear, but with awe. To her, Titan was the embodiment of certainty. He knew what to do, when to do it, and how to rally others without raising his voice. Even the stallions, who once challenged him, now trotted obediently at his command. Solana often wondered what that felt like, to be sure of your every step, your every breath. She, by contrast, moved like a shadow in daylight, quiet, careful, always just behind someone else. The herd didn't dislike her, most barely noticed her. She was sweet, gentle, no threat to anyone's position or pride. But she had never found her voice, her moment to be more. That morning the herd grazed in a wide clearing ringed by trees that whispered in the wind. Titan stood near the edge, his ears pricked toward the hills to the north. Something in the air had changed. The birds were quieter, the wind colder. The earth gave off a scent, not of rain or spring, but of unease. Solana noticed it too. She raised her head from the grass and sniffed the breeze. Her ears flicked. Something stirred in the shadows. A pair of young colts, Dust and Flint, sprinted past her, galloping in playful circles. Solana flinched and stepped aside as Dust kicked up a spray of dirt near her hooves. "Sorry," he whinnied, barely slowing down. Marla gave them a warning snort, but the colts paid no mind. Their games often blurred the line between play and provocation. Solana sighed and stepped toward a quieter patch of grass near the stream, where she could watch the herd without being swept into its rhythm. Titan, meanwhile, had begun moving toward the ridge that overlooked the northern edge of the valley. He often scouted the land before leading the herd onward. Today, however, he moved slower. His gait was cautious, his head low. The wind carried warnings, not just of weather, but of danger. The silence snapped. From the trees beyond the ridge came a sudden, deep, guttural sound that made the ground tremble. Titan reared, trumpeting a shrill call that echoed through the trees. Birds erupted from the branches. The herd froze, then chaos. From the underbrush burst a mountain lion, long, lean, starving. It had been watching them for hours, perhaps longer, tracking Titan's every movement, waiting for a moment of solitude. But Titan was not one to run. With a furious scream, he charged, hooves pounding like war drums. The lion met him head-on. For a few blinding seconds, it was a tangle of fur, teeth, and hoofs, rage and survival, locked in a deadly dance. The herd panicked. Mares cried out to their foals. Stallions bucked and bolted. Solana stood frozen as horses surged past her, fleeing toward the safety of the lower valley. She turned her head, eyes locked on the ridge. Titan was still standing, but barely. The lion had sunk its teeth into his shoulder, claws raking deep into his flank. With one final desperate kick, he dislodged it, sending it tumbling into the brush. But he did not give chase. He staggered. The herd gathered far from the ridge, panting, wide-eyed, unsure what had just unfolded. Titan limped toward them, his powerful frame now trembling. Blood streaked his coat. His breaths came in sharp, painful bursts. When he reached the clearing, he collapsed near a stand of birch trees and did not rise, for the first time since any of them could remember. Titan was down, and there was no one to take his place. The hours that followed were filled with confusion. Horses huddled in clusters, looking to one another, trying to interpret what would come next. The older mares kept the youngest foals close. The stallions paced, casting nervous glances toward Titan's motionless body. Marla pressed close to Solana. "He needs rest," she said softly, more to herself than to her daughter. Solana watched the mighty stallion from afar. Her heart ached. Titan, the unshakable force, now barely breathing. "Who will lead us?" Solana asked. Marla didn't answer. In the wild, there was little room for ceremony. Injured leaders were often challenged, replaced, left behind. But no one dared approach Titan yet. Not with the lion, still possibly nearby. Not with the herd, this uncertain. By dusk, the winds had returned. Solana stood beside a low rise and watched the sky darken. The wind spoke in long sighs, brushing through the grass like whispers. She could feel the herd's fear palpable, pressing, and for the first time in her life, she felt something else, responsibility. Not because anyone looked to her, they didn't, but because no one was stepping forward. She took a step toward the center of the clearing. Then another. Dust and Flint, the rowdy colts, stood near the edge of the stream, arguing about whether the mountain lion would come back. One of the older mares, Laurel, was trying to calm a frightened foal whose mother had gone missing in the panic. Solana hesitated, heart hammering. Then she walked toward them. It was awkward at first. Her voice was small, her steps unsure. But she asked questions. "Is anyone missing? Where's the foal's mother? Did anyone see where the lion went?" Laurel blinked at her. So did the others. It was the first time many of them had ever heard Solana speak in more than a few gentle phrases. "I think," she said, her voice steadier now, "we need to move away from the ridge. The trees aren't safe." Laurel nodded slowly. "Where do you suggest?" Solana swallowed hard. "There's a glade beyond the southern stream. Titan led us there last summer. It's open, safer." A pause. Then Laurel said, "You're right. It wasn't agreement in a grand gesture, but it was enough." Others followed as Solana led the group south, glancing over her shoulder constantly, half expecting someone to take over. But no one did, not because they trusted her, yet because there was no one else. The glade offered some relief, surrounded by low hills and open sky. It provided visibility, shelter, and a stream that curved along the western edge. The grass was still green, untouched by hooves for many months. Solana stood at the center as the herd settled. She could hardly believe it. They had listened, not all of them, not entirely, but enough. Marla approached, eyes wide with pride. "You were brave." Solana shook her head. "I didn't do anything special." "You did more than most," Marla said. "More than you've ever done." Solana looked at the horizon. "I was just scared." And no one else moved. "Courage," her mother said gently, "isn't being unafraid. It's doing the right thing even when you are." That night, Solana lay beside her mother, watching the stars creep across the sky. Titan remained behind, guarded by 2 stallions, who promised to return once he could walk. But the herd had moved, because she had spoken, and something had shifted inside her. A seed. It wasn't confidence. Not yet. But the beginning of belief that maybe, just maybe, she could lead, even if her voice still trembled. The wind changed. It didn't howl like before, didn't roar through the trees or bite at ears and tails. Instead, it carried something, subtler tension, like the tremble of a bowstring just before it snaps. The glade was quiet, too quiet, and the stillness that blanketed it had teeth. The herd had spent the night huddled together, uneasy. Though they were far from the ridge and the scene of the mountain lion's attack, no one felt safe yet. They didn't speak it. Allowed horses had no words for dread, but their bodies betrayed it in every twitch, every sharp glance at the trees, every tail flicked too fast. Solana woke just after dawn, her ears alert before her eyes opened. The ground was cold beneath her. Her mother, Marla, stood close, already up, her head turned toward the stream, as if listening for something that wasn't there. "He's not back yet," she said softly when she noticed Solana stirring. "Titan?" Solana asked, lifting her head. Marla nodded to Stallion's Bram. And Keel had stayed with the wounded leader the day before. They were meant to return with news, or with him, if he could stand. But the sun was already peeking through the trees, and there was no sign of them. Solana pushed to her feet. Her legs ached from lying in one position all night, and her mind still buzzed with questions she didn't want to voice. She didn't know what she was supposed to do now. She had only moved the herd out of panic. That didn't mean she was ready to lead, except there was no one else. Most of the older mares were calm, maternal, thoughtful, but they didn't lead. The stallions deferred to Titan even in his absence. Some of the colts puffed themselves up, nipping and posing near the center of the herd, but their energy was show, not substance. Solana felt their eyes when she moved, just a few, curious, uncertain. She wasn't invisible anymore. A part of her missed it, but another part, buried deep, stood a little straighter. By mid-morning, the herd was uneasy. Bram returned alone. He limped slightly, his coat stained with dry mud and old blood, and his head hung low with exhaustion. Solana and Marla were the first to approach. "What happened?" Marla asked, voice tight. "Keel stayed behind," Bram said, panting. "Titan, he's alive, but he's worse, fevered, barely eating." Keel didn't want to leave him alone. Solana's ears swiveled. "Can he walk?" "Not yet. He's trying." "Will he survive?" she asked, fearing the answer. Bram hesitated. "I don't know." The words hit the air like a gust of wind, slamming a stable door. Some of the herd shifted uncomfortably. A foal let out a soft, frightened whinny, quickly comforted by her mother. "What should we do?" Laurel asked, stepping forward. Bram glanced around. "We wait. Titan might recover. And if he doesn't," someone else muttered. Solana felt the tension coiling again. Waiting could be dangerous. The lion might return, or others might come. The scent of blood always traveled far. And then there was food to consider. The grass here was lush, but not endless. The herd couldn't afford to be paralyzed by fear or loyalty. Not out here. Not with winter, only a few moons away, and Solana knew it. She stepped forward. "We should move," she said quietly. All eyes turned to her. "Not far," she added quickly, "but to higher ground. There's a ridge just west of the glade. It overlooks the low valley, gives us a view in every direction. It's safer there. We can see what's coming." A murmur swept through the group. Bram narrowed his eyes. "You want to lead us there?" Solana hesitated. Her throat felt dry. "I think someone has to." "And why you?" one of the younger stallions, Jorah, snapped. "You barely spoke a word your whole life. One lucky decision doesn't make you a leader." The words stung, but they didn't cut her down, because Solana had thought them herself only hours ago. "I don't know if I'm a leader," she admitted, eyes locked on his. "But I know I don't want to see us waiting until something terrible happens. I'm not asking you to follow me because I'm brave. I'm asking you to follow because it might keep us safe." There was silence. Then Laurel stepped forward. "She's right. So did Marla. She moved us before. We're still here because of it." More heads nodded. Even Bram, though reluctantly. "Fine," he said. "We move." The climb to the western ridge was slow. Solana led with her head low, scanning every rustle in the grass, every branch that twitched. The rest of the herd followed in a loose line behind her, stopping occasionally to graze or drink. Jorah trailed at the back, still bristling, muttering to the colts, who shared his skepticism. But Solana didn't let it shake her. She didn't walk like Titan tall, proud, commanding. She walked like herself, careful, quiet, aware. Her ears stayed in constant motion. Her nose tested the wind, and slowly she started to see things differently. The game trails crossing the ridge, the way deer had passed through recently, the broken branch along the edge of the ravine, signs that it had held weight recently, the faint, fading scent of wolfknot, fresh, but recent enough to remember. She remembered what her mother had taught her as a foal. The land speaks. You only need to listen. She was listening now. The ridge was breathtaking. From its height, the valley stretched for miles, a patchwork of grass, rock, and forested veins. The herd clustered at the top, their bodies turning as one to take in the view. Even the skeptical ones went quiet. "This is good," Laurel said, nodding. "We'll be able to spot danger before it reaches us," added Marla. They began to spread out, grazing, resting, tails flicking lazily. Solana finally let herself exhale. Then Bram galloped up from the base of the hill, his breath ragged. "Keel's here," he called. He brought Titan. Gasps followed. The herd rushed down the trail, and Solana with them. At the base, Keel stood flanked by two other stallions. Between them walked Titan, but barely. His head hung low, and his right foreleg was wrapped in bark and clotha, makeshift bandage, likely tied by desperate human hands. Discarded and repurposed, his flanks were gaunt, his eyes glassy. Still, he walked. Solana approached, heart-pounding. Titan paused. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, something beyond words. Not approval, not yet, but recognition. He saw her. He knew. They made a place for Titan near the edge of the camp, beneath a broad pine that offered shade and seclusion. The mares tended to him with quiet devotion, bringing water, soft grass, company. But even so, the truth settled over the herd like dust. He could not lead them now, not in this state, and so they looked to Solana, not all at once, not openly, but when danger seemed near, when decisions needed making, their eyes turned to her, and each time she spoke, at first, it felt strange, heavy, like she was wearing a saddle, too large, dragging a wagon to weight it. But with every decision move, at dawn, stay through dusk, avoid the southern slope, she grew more certain. Confidence was not lightning, it was a fire, slow to catch, hard to kindle, but once it burned, it could light the way that night. As stars blinked above the ridge, and the moon carved silver paths on the ground, Solana stood alone on a rise above the sleeping herd. She listened to the wind, to the rustle of leaves, to the faint, slow breath of Titan as he slept, not far below. Marla joined her quietly. "You're doing well," she said. "I'm scared," Solana admitted. Marla nodded. "Good." Solana glanced at her, startled. Fear reminds us to think, to care, to listen. They stood in silence, shoulder to shoulder. "You think he'll recover?" Solana asked. Marla was quiet for a moment. He might, or he might not. Solana didn't like that answer, but she accepted it. "What happens if he doesn't?" Marla turned to her. "Then you lead." Solana looked down at the herd. It didn't seem possible. She had been a shadow, a whisper, now a guide, but no one else was stepping forward, and somehow that made it enough. The days that followed Titan's return were filled with both hope and tension. Titan remained weak, unable to walk more than a few steps at a time. He was eating now, thanks to the relentless care of the herd, but the fire that had once blazed in his eyes flickered low. He was no longer the horse who could silence a challenge with a stare or gallop the length of a valley before sunrise. Solana watched him closely every morning and night, waiting for some change, a sign, a moment where he might rise again, not just on his feet, but to power. But it didn't come. What did come, however, was trust, not in Titan, in her. Bit by bit, Solana found herself shouldering the responsibility of the herd, not by demand, not by title, but by necessity. It started with small things, choosing when to move, when to rest, when to drink. The others began falling into rhythm with her decisions without needing to be told. Even Jorah, though still bitter, stopped arguing. He didn't follow closely, but he no longer challenged her either. One morning, she led them across a narrow ravine that cut through the eastern ridge. The crossing was difficult height footing, loose stones, sharp edges, but on the other side waited a valley rich with tall grass and a shaded stream. A place Titan had once told them about in summer. She remembered because she listened. They spent 3 full days there, undisturbed. It was the first time in weeks the herd had felt peace. On the 4th morning, the peace shattered. Smoke, Solana smelled it before she saw it, a sharp, stinging scent that crept into her nose like invisible thorns. She raised her head, ears twitching. Others smelled it too. Mares paused in their grazing. Colts stopped mid-prance. The entire herd turned as one toward the southern sky. A low orange glow hovered just beyond the ridgeline. It was faint, but growing. Fire. Panic rippled through the herd. Solana felt it like a vibration beneath her hooves. The wind is pushing it north, Bram said, galloping up beside her. That means it's coming for us, Solana replied, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. The herd began to bunch together, shifting nervously. Foals cried out for their mothers. The older horses snapped at each other in fear. We have to move, Laurel said. No, Solana said. Everyone turned to her. We have to think. Bram gave her a wide-eyed stare. Think, there's a fire, Solana. I know, she said. But running blind will trap us. She turned and pointed with her nose toward the west. If we go straight, we hit the rocky valley. No grass, no water, nothing but cliffs. We'll lose foals there. Jorah stepped forward. Then where? Solana closed her eyes for a moment, recalling there was a path, north-northwest, a shallow pass Titan had shown her once, when she was just a yearling. It curved around the base of the eastern ridge and connected back to a wide riverbed dry most of the year, but open, clear of trees. Fire couldn't cross it quickly. It would buy them time. I know where we can go, she said, but we have to leave now, and we have to stay close together. The wind howled suddenly, carrying the first wave of smoke over the trees. Birds erupted from the branches. A doe and her fawn leaped from the woods and vanished across the rise. Solana didn't wait for more argument. She reared up, trumpeting one short, sharp call. Then she ran, and the herd followed. The path was narrow, almost hidden by the underbrush. Solana pushed through it, with her head low and her ears tight to her neck. The smoke thickened behind them, and the roar of flames began to echo faintly through the trees like distant thunder. Solana ran at the front, but her mind was behind her. Were they keeping up? Was anyone lost? She turned her head slightly and spotted Bram running parallel to her, checking the stragglers. Marla was near the center, keeping the youngest ones close. Jorah brought up the rear. He wasn't fighting her now, he was guarding them. The air grew hotter. Ash began to fall like black snow, stinging eyes and noses. Still, Solana pressed on. She leaped over fallen logs, ducked under low limbs, led them around patches of dry grass that could ignite at any second. Her lungs burned. Her legs ached. But she didn't stop, because if she stopped, they'd burn. Then, at last, the trees opened. The dry riverbed stretched wide before them, a massive swath of pale, cracked stone and scattered pebbles. The far side was lined with boulders and sparse bushes, but there was nothing to burn. It was safe. For now, Solana galloped into the open hooves, thudding against the hard-packed earth. The herd spilled in behind her, panting, coughing, eyes wide with terror, but alive. She skidded to a stop near a large stone outcropping and turned to face the trees. The fire was coming. They had minutes, maybe less. Stay together, she shouted, over the roar of the wind. Get behind the rocks. Lie low. She ran back and forth across the herd, urging the mares and foals to cluster tightly near the center. The smoke now poured into the riverbed, reducing visibility to mere feet. The heat pulsed like a living thing, reaching for them. Then the flames came. Trees lit up like matchsticks. The front line of fire rushed to the edge of the riverbed and stopped hesitating, licking at the stone with tongues of flame, but it couldn't cross. Not yet. Solana stood at the edge, watching it. It danced, cracked, roared, but it didn't win. Not this time. That night, when the fire had passed, the sky was an eerie red haze. Ash drifted through the air like fog. The forest behind them was gonchard, smoking, silent. Solana walked the perimeter of the herd, checking on each member. Her body ached, her voice was gone. Her legs were streaked with soot and blood from scrapes she hadn't even noticed. But everyone was alive. Marla limped slightly, but smiled when Solana passed her. "You did it," she said. Solana shook her head, too tired for pride. "We did it." Jorah approached quietly, his ears low. "I was wrong," he said simply. Solana blinked at him. "You're not just lucky," he continued. "You're right. We'd be dead without you." She nodded. There was nothing else to say. Titan lay near the edge of the herd, under a low juniper tree. His breathing was slow, shallow. He looked at her, and for the first time, he nodded. No words, just the look of a king who had seen his successor rise in the Phoenix. The next morning, the wind was still. The world smelled of smoke and damp earth. Birds were just beginning to return. The trees stood as skeletons, blackened and broken, but the fire was gone. Solana climbed a low ridge just east of the riverbed and looked out over the burned forest. It would take years to regrow, but already, here and there, tiny green shoots poked up from the ground. She didn't know what lay ahead. More storms, more predators, more fire, perhaps. But she knew something now she hadn't known a week ago. She could lead, not perfectly, not without fear, but with courage, with heart, with instinct, and the herd would follow. The fire left behind a silent world. Ash blanketed everything, the ground, the trees, even the backs of the horses. Where once there had been birdsong and the rustle of leaves, now there was only the wind sifting through scorched trunks. The landscape, once so alive, had become brittle and gray. Yet even in devastation, life stirred. Green shoots rose defiantly from the blackened soil. Small insects reappeared. Deer tracks crisscrossed the riverbed again, tentative but hopeful. Solana led the herd cautiously from the fire zone, staying within the wide, dry channel of the river. Though safe from flames, the air still carried the bite of heat, and food was harder to find. The fire had scorched miles of grazing land. The herd's pace slowed, not from fear now, but fatigue. They were tired, all of them, even Solana, especially Solana. Days blurred together. She felt every step, every decision, in her muscles and her mind. She was no longer surprised when horses looked to her before they moved. It was expected now, normal. And yet, she never let herself grow complacent. Just because they follow, Marla once told her, doesn't mean you've arrived. It means they believe in your direction. That's something you earn again and again. That morning, the sky changed. It was subtle at first, a curtain of clouds drawn too quickly across the horizon. Then, a sharp drop in temperature. A stillness that wasn't peace, but pressure. Rain was coming. Solana lifted her nose and sniffed the air. Her ears swiveled, catching sounds beyond the trees. Distant thunder, the groan of the wind as it pulled at branches. A storm the herd had settled the night before near the bend in the river where low cliffs offered shelter. They were grazing slowly, enjoying a rare patch of green. Oblivious to the warning signs, Solana now felt vibrating through her chest. She approached Bram, who stood near a cluster of mares. "We need to move," he turned, chewing slowly. "Now," she nodded. "The storm's coming, a big one." Bram flicked his tail. "We've weathered storms before, not like this." She turned to look at the sky again. The clouds were heavier now, bloated with weight. Lightning flashed behind them like angry thoughts. Bram hesitated. He trusted her. He really did, but fatigue made even trust feel heavy. Laurel trotted up beside them. I agree with Solana. The river's dry now, but it's still a riverbed. If the mountains get hit first, the implication landed like a stone. Flash, flood. Solana looked at Bram. We can't stay here. He nodded. You lead. I'll rally. The rear, a herd moved quickly, spurred by urgency. Solana led them out of the riverbed and up a winding trail that climbed toward a plateau she had noticed days before. It wasn't lush, but it was high, and high meant safe. The rain came before they reached it, not a drizzle, a wall. The heavens opened with a sudden fury, soaking the earth in minutes. The dry ground couldn't absorb it fast enough. It pooled, then rushed downhill. Solana could feel the earth growing slick beneath her hooves. The younger foals struggled to climb the slope. The older horses leaned into the wind, their manes plastered against their necks. Lightning split the sky. Thunder answered like a drumbeat. Of the gods, Solana didn't slow. She couldn't. Every instinct screamed, get higher behind her. The roar began. It started as a murmur, then a growl, then a sound like tearing fabric stretched over stone and fury. Water. Solana looked back. A wall of it brown, churning, furious, rushed down the channel they'd just left. The river had returned, and it wasn't gentle. The flood swallowed the riverbed. It crashed through the gorge, tearing loose trees from the banks and smashing boulders into dust. Had they stayed even an hour longer, they would have been caught in it. Solana watched from the ridge, soaked, panting, her chest heaving from the climb. The herd stood behind her, silent, stunned. Marla moved to her side. You saw it coming. I felt it, Solana whispered. They watched the water rage for hours. Solana didn't rest. She walked the line, checking every horse. Dust had a cut on his leg. Laurel limped. Jorah was covered in mud, but unhurt. Titan carried to safety with the help of Bram and Keel. Lay quietly under a jutting rock, his eyes distant by nightfall. The worst had passed. The rain slowed to a drizzle. The river still boiled below, but its edge no longer crept up the slope. The herd had survived again because she had moved first. The next morning dawned cold and silver. Fog clung to the hills. The grass sparkled with droplets, and the air smelled clean, rinsed of fire and ash. Solana walked alone for a while, circling the ridge. Her legs ached, her hooves were chipped, and her mane tangled with twigs, but her heart felt strong. She was tired, but not broken. Behind her, the herd stirred. They began grazing, drinking, moving with renewed confidence. Laurel nuzzled her foal. Bram stood beside Keel, watching the sunrise. Even Jorah walked with a bit more calm in his step. Solana returned to the center of the camp. Titan was awake. He sat up slowly, his body gaunt, but his gaze clear. You led them, he said, voice low. Solana nodded. He studied her for a long moment. Not just away from fire or flood, but forward. I only did what needed doing, Titan managed, a weak smile. That's what real leaders say. He lowered his head in a bow, not out of weakness, but respect. Solana stared, unsure what to do. She had never seen him bow. Not to anyone. You've found your voice, he said. Use it well. Then he turned away, letting her stand in silence before the rising sun, feeling the weight and lightness of the moment. The days that followed were different. not just in pace or routine, but in spirit. Solana's decisions weren't questioned now. Her guidance wasn't met with hesitation. Even the older mares came to her with questions. Where to graze, where to sleep, how long to rest, she answered them. Sometimes unsure, but always honest. She wasn't leading like Titan. She was leading like herself, quiet, observant, thoughtful, and slowly the herd began to mirror her. Colts stopped roughhousing near the younger foals. Mares looked out for each other's young. Even Jorah began mentoring Dust, showing him how to read wind patterns. The herd moved with unity, and Solana realized something. She hadn't just earned their trust, she had changed them, and they had changed her one afternoon. As the wind tugged gently at the grass and the river sparkled below the ridge, Marla walked beside Solana. "You've done what I never dared dream," she said softly. "You turned fear into courage." "I still get afraid," Solana admitted. "Good," Marla replied. "That means you still care." Solana looked over the valley. "What if I fail them?" "You will," Marla said gently. "Not today, maybe not soon, but eventually. All leaders stumble. What matters is what you do after." Solana nodded. She understood now. Leadership wasn't perfection. It was consistency, integrity, the willingness to stand in the storm first. That night, Solana stood watch alone at the edge of the ridge. The sky was full of stars, clearer than she had ever seen. The moon lit the world in silver dot from behind. She heard hooves approach. Titan. He stood beside her in silence. "You remind me of someone," he said after a while. "Who?" "My first leader." She was quiet, too. Everyone underestimated her. "What happened to her?" "She saved us. Then she left." Solana looked at him. "Why?" she said. "Once a herd finds its own strength, the leader's work is done." Solana thought about that for a long time. Then she said, "I'm not ready to leave." Titan smiled, "Then stay." They watched the stars together, two leaders, one old, one new, bound by storms and silence, and the fire they had walked through. Spring arrived slowly in the high country, tiptoeing in on soft hooves and whispered breezes. The snow melt from the peaks trickled into creeks, then into the river that had once tried to take them. The fire-scorched trees, blackened and bowed, sprouted the first defiant buds. Shoots of grass emerged in patches, not yet lush, but undeniably alive. The land was healing. So was the herd. They had spent the last month following Solana's lead through recovery, finding new grazing areas, rebuilding their strength, avoiding danger. The scars of fire and flood still marked them, but no longer defined them. Their coats grew sleek again. The foals gained weight. Even the older mares walked with renewed ease. And Titan, he stood again. Not long, not far, but he was moving every day. He rose to his feet for a little longer, walked a little farther. Though he had relinquished leadership to Solana without ever saying the words, his presence was steady, supportive. They didn't talk much, Solana and Titan, but their silence spoke volumes. Each had led, each had nearly fallen, each understood the other now. One morning, as the mist curled through the valley and birds called across the new green, Solana stood atop the ridge and surveyed the horizon. The river wound peacefully below, and beyond it, barely visible, stood the edge of the old meadow, their first home. She hadn't thought about it in weeks. The place they'd fled from, the place where Titan fell, where the lion struck, where She had first stepped into uncertainty and chosen to act down. Now, she saw it not as the beginning of fear, but of becoming. Marla walked up beside her. "You're thinking of going back." Solana blinked. "How did you know?" "A mother always knows." Solana was quiet. "It feels like it's time, not because we need it, but because we left a part of ourselves there." Marla smiled. "Then go find it." The herd began the journey back that very day. The air was fresh, the trails dry, the danger low. Solana didn't rush them. She allowed grazing breaks, water stops, rest under spreading trees. This wasn't a retreat, it was a return. As they traveled, the herd felt different, more cohesive. When Solana shifted pace, the rest adjusted. When she paused to listen, the herd listened too. It wasn't obedience, it was unity. One evening, they reached a high bluff overlooking the familiar valley. The grass was greener now. Trees had begun to leaf out again. The old river's course was visible, Tamar now, receding into its banks after the spring rush. Solana stared down at it all. She felt the old fear stir in her gut, but it no longer ruled her. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was standing tall anyway. They descended the next morning. The valley welcomed them like an old friend. Birdsong returned in full chorus. Insects buzzed through tall grass. Rabbits scattered as the herd swept down into the pasture. The foals galloped, wild and free. The mares rolled in the dew-soaked clover. Solana stood still and watched. This was no longer just the place where their pain began. It was now the place they came back stronger. Titan approached her slowly. He walked without faltering now, though he still bore the limp of his wound. "You brought us home," he said. Solana nodded. "It's different. It's us that's different." They stood in silence a while longer. Titan looked over the herd with pride but not possession. "I'll never run like I used to," he admitted. "That's okay," she said. "I used to think leading was about strength," Titan added. "Now I know it's about knowing when to stand aside." Solana turned to him. "You still lead." He shook his head. "Not anymore. I support." She didn't argue. He had given her the space to rise. That was its own kind of leadership. Summer came with warmth and renewal. The valley blossomed. The river offered fresh water, and the hills provided shelter. No lion returned, no flood rose, no fire burned. But the herd never forgot. They moved with intention now. They grazed with awareness. They followed because they chose to, not because they feared what would happen if they didn't. One evening, a stranger appeared, a lone Philinaut, much younger than Solana had been when the blizzard struck. Thin, nervous, half-starved, she stumbled into the valley at dusk. Wild-eyed and skittish, the herd stirred. Bram moved to intercept her, wary. So did Keel. Solana stepped forward. She walked slowly, head lowered, tail still, ears turned forward. Not a challenge, but a welcome. The young filly froze, then took a hesitant step, then another, and Solana met her, not with questions, but with presence. That night, the filly slept near the edge of the herd, trembling but safe, and Solana watched over her, remembering. The days passed like flowing water. Solana grew stronger, but never hard. The herd grew larger. New foals were born. Colts matured. The older horses rested more. Titan became a quiet sage offering, wisdom but never command. One afternoon, as thunder rolled in the far distance, and storm clouds gathered over the mountains. Solana stood beneath a tree and watched the sky. Now, taller, Calmer trotted up beside her. "Storm's coming," she nodded. "I know." He tilted his head. "You worried?" "No," she said, smiling. "We've weathered worse." And they had the herd followed her without hesitation to the North Ridge, where she knew they'd be safe. They trusted her. She trusted herself. The rain fell gently. No fire came, just rain. And afterward, flowers bloomed in the blackened earth life, born from trials, just like her, that night. Under stars older than memory, Solana stood watch. Again, she didn't need to. Others offered, but she did it anyway, not out of fear, out of love. And beside her, the once shy filly, now calm and curious, stood two together. They watched the darkness, the trees, the wind, and when the breeze carried with it nothing but peace, Solana smiled. Had led them through fire, through flood, through fear, and now through peace. She had found her courage, she had found her place, and she had brought them all home. The end.